I'd like to welcome everyone to this session and particularly to identify the roles of the different people. In this session we have two plenary speeches by Gabriele, but also from Professor Julie Thompson-Klein. Gabriele is here at the ANU and also is Chief Investigator of the ARC Centre of Excellence and is Director of numerous research schools and centres at ANU. Very, very busy person. Julie Thompson-Klein is a Faculty Fellow for Interdisciplinary Development in the Division of Research at Wayne State University, and she's also a Professor of Humanities in the English department there. And you've already received instructions to have your handouts ready for her presentation. Another important participant is Professor Alison Ritter, from UNSW, who's here at the front. And Alison is a distinguished scholar of drug policy and has experience both in the university sector but also relevant to this conference in policy development. The job of the moderator is, in a sense, to to be a representative of the people in the virtual world who are out there online and collect their questions and feed them to me. So I have to, if I look at sometimes that my eyes are slightly crossed, it's because I'm trying to keep an eye on what's going on here, but also on what Alison is signalling to me. So please be visible. I've not done this type of chairing before. So, as Gabriele said, 20 minutes plenary, and we'll then follow immediately by a 10-minute question discussion session. So I'll leave the podium and sit over here with my warning cards. Not that I suspect I'll have to need them, but welcome to the podium. Gabriele Banner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, I've just discovered that I'm too short to see the screen. That's not going to help me very much. So, I'm going to talk a bit about the rationale for this conference, which has also been the rationale for the work that I've been doing, which is really a frustration around the silos that we're in the work that we do, trying to deal with complex problems more effectively. So if I can, this is going to be a bit bizarre. So if I can give you an overview, I'm going to talk about the kind of complex problems that we deal with. I'm going to talk about, what else am I going to talk about? The need for a better balance in research methods. I'm going to talk about ways of, the importance of fragmentation and ways of overcoming it. And I'm going to talk about whether or not we need a new discipline. So let me talk about complex problems. These are the sorts of things that we work on. And one of the things that's really exciting about this conference is that we have people here representing a range of different complex problems that we're working on. And the point is not to be talking about the problem, but to be talking about the way that we deal with the problem. That's what we're trying to do at this conference. So, people talk about these as complex problems, that's the wording I prefer to choose. Other people talk about them as wicked problems. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that define the kind of work that we do. Part of it is that these problems don't occur in isolation. They're connected to other problems. They have a range of constraints, ideological, cultural, political and other constraints, so they're not straightforward. There are value conflicts in what they do. They're resistant to change. Data can be uncertain or missing, and there can be considerable uncertainty around and ambiguity around what's happening. And they can have contradictory solutions, so there can be numerous possible options for what it is that we're trying to do. So let's look at what we're good at in the university sector and what we need to get better at. So we're good at reductionist thinking, but we need to get better at systems thinking. Can I just say, is it going to work if I move out to here? Stand. It is a bit I do need to be able to see what I'm doing and not keep turning back, which is going to drive me completely crazy. Is that going to work from a kangaroo point of view? Thank you. So we're good at reductionist thinking, and we need to get better at systems thinking. We're good at doing work that's context-free. That's what the sciences try to teach us how to do, take context out of the picture and look for universal laws. And we need to get better at doing work that's context-dependent. We're good at doing work where we take values out of the picture, and we need to get better at dealing with contested values. We're good at trying to manage change, randomised controlled trials. You very carefully manage what change happens when. We need to get much better at working with change that's uncontrolled. We're good at turning what we don't know into what we know. That's the rationale behind what we do, but we can't do that for everything, and Mike Smithson's going to give a plenary on that later in the conference. And we need to get better at dealing with other ways of managing unknowns, so ways of accepting or exploiting unknowns, for example. We're good at trying to find clear, perfect solutions to the problem that we're working on, and we need to get better at finding best possible or least worst solutions. And that's the challenge for us, really. What I want to do now is to use this beautiful sculpture on the ANU campus, Cool as Ripple by Tim Spellman, as a bit of an analogy for what we're trying to do. So what Tim is about, this sculpture is about complementarity, if you like. And I'd like to superimpose it onto the list that I've just developed, one part of the sculpture over what we're good at, another part of the sculpture at what we need to improve, and to say that this is the kind of balance that we have in the research world now. So we've got lots of good experience at reductionist control type of research. We're not so good at the kind of systems-based research. That's what we in the room are good at, but as a research community as a whole, we're not so good at those other types of research. So what I'm arguing we need to do is we need to make that little bit of the sculpture into a big complementary bit of the sculpture. That's really the challenge for us, and the challenge for this conference is to start that process. So one of the key parts of that is to overcome fragmentation. And what I've done with this word cloud, which has been on this is not a real word cloud, this is a manufactured word cloud, which has got artistic benefit rather than being descriptive of the state of the art as it is, although it's a little bit descriptive, is to really try to pull together all the different strands of work that we're doing that have some interface and interaction and that are represented at this conference. No doubt there are some that have been missed. Systems engineering is one of the ones that's been missed that should be on the list, and I hope that throughout the conference we'll identify other partners who need to be part of what we're doing. Let me just illustrate this issue of fragmentation with an example of the plenary speakers at the conference. So this is the plenary speakers at the conference and the intersections that I know of between them, that they either know each other or work together. And you'll see that the intersections aren't all that great. There's a lot of intersection around the transdisciplinary group. Some of this is an artefact of who I know and has been invited, obviously, but I think some of this is also the intersection around transdisciplinarity is also not coincidental, I think, because Christian Pohl, who's in that picture, has been very instrumental in running a transdisciplinary network with a series of conferences over 3 years that has brought people together. And what we want to do at this conference is to increase the number of lines. So if I just took Linda Newhouser as an example, if Linda got connected to everybody at the conference, this is what the connection map would look like. And you can imagine that if all the plenary speakers got connected, what that connection map would look like. And if all of us got connected with each other, all of us in the room got connected, just imagine what it would look like. And then if all of us in the room and online got connected, just imagine what that would look like. That's really what we're trying to do with this conference, is to overcome the silos that we work in trying to get out of silos. I mean, I think that's one of the ultimate ironies, really. So one of the challenges is that when we have fragmented research communities, we also have fragmented resources. And here I've just put up a number of the books that have been produced by various people that are relevant to this topic. And we don't just have written work in the published domain, books and papers and grey literature, but we've also got a whole lot of information about how to do this in our heads. So there's a whole lot of practical experience that we've got that we've never written up. And that's partly because we don't have a way of expressing it and writing about it, and that's an important part of what we're trying to do at this conference is to really find a way to come together to express what it is that we're trying to do. So the digital posters are an attempt to do that, are an attempt to try and get our work into a format where it's widely accessible to other people, making this conference available online, and all of it's going to go into a data repository at the end of the conference to start building a repository of what it is that we do. So as I said, part of what I've been doing is trying to think about how we can go forward, how we can get us working together and learning from each other and improving our practice of trying to really overcome all these communities. And this book that is going to be launched on Wednesday is an attempt to do that. And the book has 4 main proposals. One is that there are different kinds of interdisciplinarity, and one of the stumbling blocks is that we don't differentiate between them. The kind of interdisciplinarity that's the focus of this conference is working on complex problems, as I outlined earlier. So how do we work together on complex problems? And what's really interesting is that there's no label for those of us who do interdisciplinary in inverted commas, but work that tries to bring different disciplines together working on a complex problem. There's no way of differentiating that from an individual who's trying to bridge 2 disciplines, which is a different form of interdisciplinarity. So the second proposition the book makes is that we need to develop a label for what it is that we do. I'm actually not a fan of new labels, so I find it a bit ironic that I'm advocating new labels, but that's what the work that I've been doing, that's the conclusion that it's led me to. And I'm suggesting that we need to think about a new research style, which I'm suggesting might be called integrative applied research. The third proposition of the book is probably the most controversial, which is that I'm arguing that we need an underpinning discipline, which might be called integration and implementation sciences. And the fourth proposition of the book is that we need to have a project that's probably equivalent in scale to the Manhattan Project, the building the atomic bomb, or the Human Genome Project, unravelling the mysteries of the human genome to bring all of our work together. If we survey the breadth of work around the world that people are doing, the methodological work about how to work on complex problems that you're doing in the room, that you're doing online, that the people who aren't part of this conference are doing, I'd argue that there is as much work out there that needs to be brought to, that bringing that work together is as big an effort as was needed to unravel the human genome or as was needed to develop the atomic bomb. So I'm inviting us to do something equally explosive and to think big about what it is that we need to do. I'm arguing that this conference is the first stage, potentially, in that kind of a big science project. So what integration and implementation sciences does, or aims to do, is to give us a way of talking about what it is that we do. And it does that by putting forward 3 domains and 5 questions. So the 3 domains are epitomised in these 3 pentagons. The first is bringing together knowledge, not only academic knowledge but also practice-based knowledge. What I'm arguing is that thinking about what we know is not enough. We also have to think about what we don't know, because when we try to help decision makers make decisions on complex problems, what we know is only part of the picture. What we don't know also has to be taken into account. Otherwise, we're going to end up with adverse unintended consequences and unpleasant surprises. And then what we need to do is to bring together what we know, an effective approach to what we don't know, and to support decision makers, to support policy makers and practitioners in making policy and practice change. So what we need to do is to bring together the evidence, the unknowns, and to make change happen. That's really our task. And that's the basic framework that I'm suggesting we could use as an organising principle. In terms of the 5 questions, I'm arguing that we could put our concepts and methods into 5, organise them using these following 5 questions. The first is, what is it that we're trying to do? What is it that we're trying to achieve, and who is it that we're trying to benefit? The second, which is the richest of the questions, is what is it we're trying to do in terms of knowledge synthesis, unknowns, and making change happen. And under this, we have a whole range of, this is where all the systems thinking concepts, all the concepts for dealing with value conflict come in, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. Then there's the how question. What are the methods that we use? So this is where dialogue methods and modelling and working together to frame problems all comes in under this how question. The fourth question recognises the importance of context. So how do we recognise the context that we're working in for each of our domains? And the last question is outcome. How do we know that what we've done has worked? So if we put this onto the 3 pentagons and we just take the first pentagon, domain 1, bringing knowledge together, you can see that the reason it's a pentagon is that it houses these 5 questions, and I'd invite you to look and think about whether all the work that you do can be accommodated here. It may well not be, there may well have to be modifications. That wouldn't surprise me at all. But what I'm trying to do with this is to give us a starting point for housing the methodology that we work on, for being able to describe what it is that we do. So when I talked about all this knowledge that's in people's heads, one of the reasons why it's in people's heads and not documented is that we don't have ways of writing about it. And that's really what it is that we're trying to do in this conference, is to get a shared understanding of what's important and how we might document it and write it up. So let me just come back to the controversial issue of whether or not there should be a discipline. I'm arguing that there are 4, I can't get my fingers coordinated either, 4 main reasons for a discipline. One is for it to be an organised repository of knowledge. One is it to give us an identity and a community of peers. One is through that to do a certain amount of quality control of what we think should be part of this domain and what we think isn't either appropriate or isn't of a sufficient standard. And the other is the issue of power. I think one of the reasons why we're not more visible in the various processes in our countries for funding work and for measuring excellence is because we are such a fragmented, disparate community. And by coming together, we can be more powerful and we can argue for better recognition of what we do, both within our universities, within our funding organisations, within our countries and internationally. And I'm unashamed about saying that trying to become more powerful is an important part of what it is that we're trying to do. So where do we go next? Really, it's over to you. And as part of this 3 days, I'm hoping that you'll think about whether there are enough commonalities between the people that we've brought together. And one of the things that's been a thrill about this conference is that we've captured the diversity. We've not only captured the diversity in Canberra, but we've captured the diversity online. So there aren't kind of big clusters of people doing similar kinds of work. We've really got a broad array of the issues that were in the word cloud that are represented. So are there enough commonalities between our diversity to mean that we do want to become a community of peers? Do we want to be a community of peers? Do we like each other enough to want to work together? And do we want to develop a new discipline? And those things don't all have to go together. We can do some of them and not the other. But this is really our opportunity to think about how much of this we want to do and whether or not we want to do it and how we want to do it. So that's really the challenge for the conference. That's really the rationale for the conference. And as I've said, that's really the rationale for the work that I've been doing for the whole of my life, really, but particularly for the last 12 years. So I was going to try and test out the timing system because we've got a really spiffy way of shutting people up at the end, but we'll see how we go. We're right on time, and I think we're over to questions. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Gabriele. As predicted, Gabriele was bang on time, so we have plenty of time, or more specifically 10 minutes precisely, for questions. So I think in the first instance we might see, Alison, if there are any questions online, recognising that we're trying to do something different with this conference to be inclusive.
Sure. The most important post was from someone who's watching via web stream who's having trouble with the slides. So if we can help that person, that would be terrific. Gabriele, one of our people, Philip Wallace, noted that you used the word complex problems instead of wicked problems and was wondering about the consequence of choosing that word by way of framing. Can you comment?
Thank you. And thanks to the person who brought me something to stand on to make me a bit taller, which will help for the short people. I just dislike wicked as a label. I just think it's not very helpful or effective, and so I think we should talk about what it is that we're talking about, which is complexity. But if everybody decides wicked's what we want to, this is a peer process that we're in now. We've got to decide on our own terminology and what we're going to do. So that's my plug.
We've got a number of questions, maybe here oh right, sorry. If you could just introduce yourself first and name and organisation.
Jane Holloway from Hawkesbury Agricultural College originally, but now with the Department of Defence. Thanks, Gabriele. This is a terrific effort, and I really support what you're trying to do. I just wondered if people would like to consider also that there are a number of established waxing and waning communities who are also playing in this space or an associated space, and how we can reach out to those communities. There's a lot of integration and implementation sciences work in, for example, agriculture and rural development, but it's a very, as you say, it's a very small community and quite fragmented. So I just wondered if you had any ideas about reaching out to some of those communities and whether we can consider that over the next 3 days. Thank you. Thank you very much for the conference.
That's really an important part of what we're doing. I'm pleased to say we do have people here that represent those communities, but because we're so fragmented and disparate, there's a whole lot of... It's hard to find everybody. So we looked at the professional associations that have some linkage into what we do, and we identified 60 of those. And getting those to work together and to intersect more, and then there are a bunch of people who don't belong to that. So what we're trying, this is, it is up to all of us to kind of reach out and to see what we can do, and then for people to decide whether or not we want to play together. I guess that's the other big challenge.
So if we take this question here.
Hi, Mark Edwards from Business School at UWA. Gabriele, this issue of interdisciplinarity has been around for many decades. I'm just wondering if you've got any particular reasons why it hasn't actually stuck as a particular discipline or been more recognised in terms of the institutionalisation of interdisciplinarity. So the particular reasons, have you got particular reasons why it's been around for so many decades and yet we're still talking about now forming a discipline and trying to help the establishment of this, cross-boundary approach to research?
So, Mark, I hope you'll also ask that question of our next speaker, Julie Thompson-Klein, who's going to be our first online speaker, because interdisciplinarity is her thing. But I would argue that part of it is because interdisciplinarity is such a catch-all, and there are different kinds of interdisciplinarity, and because we don't differentiate between them, it's all mushed up, and so it's not clear what we're talking about. I think that's one thing, and I think the other is that we don't have a set of methods to write up what it is that we're doing, to describe what we're doing. So if we were a room full of chemists or sociologists, we would have a shorthand way of talking about our methodologies. We don't have that in those of us who are interested in interdisciplinarity or integration or implementation or whatever we want to call what we do. We don't, the fact that I'm saying that is proof of that. We don't have a shared way of describing what it is that we do, which is one of the reasons I'm arguing for a discipline.
Question over there.
Yes, hi, Susie Goff from Culture Shift. I guess my question is around whether in fact choosing to be a discipline doesn't actually resolve the problem, because it is the very nature of a discipline that has actually created the siloing and the resulting power issues that have created the slowness that we're all talking about for the last 30 years. And I think when you're doing a transformational process, I think we should be looking at the very architecture of the social and knowledge systems that evolve or emerge from a transformational process. And so I'm not discounting this, I can see the strategic thinking behind creating an interdisciplinary discipline, but I would just like to make a little room in the conversation over the next 3 days for the possibility that we're not actually solving the root metaphor issue around our felt sense of what we're meant to be doing by choosing to call ourselves a discipline.
Susie, there will be many people who agree with you. The solution to our problem is like the solution to all other complex problems. There is no perfect solution. There are only least worst and best possible solutions. And I'm arguing that in the state of our development now, a discipline would be helpful, because the reality is we're incredibly fragmented as we are now, and we need something to pull us together. That might not be what we do in the long term, but I'm arguing that it might be helpful now. But I also acknowledge that there are many people who disagree. There are many of the speakers, plenary speakers, who will put an argument that's much more sympathetic with yours, and that's the debate that we need to have. We need to have it in the next 3 days, and we need to have it going forward from here.
There's a question here.
Yeah. Alan McLucas from the University of New South Wales at Canberra. My question relates to, we talk about complexity, complex problems, managing complex problems. I don't think we actually ever manage complex problems. We deal with complex problems by coping with them and finding strategies that allow us to cope. But there's also the issue of the difference between the complexity, the inherent complexity that we might describe in a problem, and the ability that we have to deal with that. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why we create silos, is because we've got different coping mechanisms. I guess my question relates to what can we do to close the gap between the nature or the complexity of the problems we deal with and our own inherent ability to cope with them.
I'm going to wimp out on that question because we've actually run out of time, if I'm right. I think we're ready to cross to Julie, is that right? But I think, Alan, that's a really important question, and is one of the things that we need to be discussing over the next 3 days. How do we do that? I think it's